Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, wherever you are in the world today. And welcome to the next in our edition of Purposeful Stories, stories from the intersection, from the front lines of the intersection of sport, business, and purpose. Today, a really important topic, something that I care very deeply about, being the father of two sons that have benefited personally out of being able to play sport growing up. I've seen how it shaped their lives. And it's been interesting. They both chose to do different sports and it affected them in different ways, but both benefited out of sport. And so with us today, two people who are deeply involved in youth sports. Benita Fitzgerald-Mosley. Benita is, probably needs no introduction, a former Olympic gold medalist, on all sorts of committees from the IOC to all sorts of things. I can't keep up with Benita. A real champion from the Sport for Good world, and a friend and colleague. And Benita, it's great to have you with us here today.
Thanks, Neill.
And also on the call, Terri Lakowski. Terri is with Activity Policy Solutions, who are working actively with Benita and her colleagues on this Play Coalition. Terri, great to have you with us too today. And interesting to hear your perspective on all of this, because you come at it from maybe a slightly different one to the one that Benita and I would come at it from. So let's get going. You know, when I first read this headline, $8.5 billion effectively bailout for youth sports, I kind of sat back in my chair and said, that's a lot of money, but it's about time that everybody started taking youth sports seriously. Benita, just to provide us with some context to all of this, I mean, I was looking at the press release a short while ago. It was only April the 21st that this announcement was made, which is less than a month ago. How did it all come together and happen so quickly?
I'll give you a little intro, but Terri was there from the very, very beginning, so I'm going to let her tell a little bit more of the backstory. I joined, if it was April 21st, I probably joined April 25th, like it, right afterwards. But we're a bit flying the plane and building it at the same time. It's been fast and furious because anything relative to COVID-19 seems to be happening at an accelerated pace. We are united to play, over 3,000 organizations that really understand the benefits of youth sports, both on and off the playing field. We also collectively feel the negative impact of this COVID-19 pandemic on youth sports, effectively completely shut down as of the early part of March. Sport was pretty much the leader in kind of shutting things down as the NBA and the NHL and Major League Baseball all postponed or suspended their seasons, and youth sport didn't fall far behind that. As the playing fields closed, as leagues shut down, as kids' activities, practices, facilities all shut down, kids found themselves with to play and support them. This organization is really highlighting those fact and I think the power of youth sport and families and children, but also the economic engine that youth sports plays as well.
So Terri,
did you want to give some more background on the Play Sports and how it got together? Sorry.
It's been a whirlwind. You definitely got that part right. There was a growing sense of urgency, that youth sports organizations were struggling. And a group of us got together recognizing that, we are stronger together and we needed help. And the headline really should be less about 8.5 bailout. And the headline is that youth sports matter. And you said it when you first started. Your sons played sports. I was a college basketball player, definitely not of Benita's prestige, but youth sports matter. Sports, they can save lives, and with kids, it provides health benefits, social emotional benefits, lowers anxiety, kids do better in school. And those of us who've come together to start plays realize that unless we did something, the infrastructure that supports youth sports and provides these critical programs to kids would collapse. And that was the impetus behind the Plays Coalition, recognizing that we have to prevent the collapse of this critical infrastructure. And to do so, we needed to bring our voices together to be stronger.
So how does something like this start, Terri? I mean, it's just, I mean, the number is huge. And the reason that I focus on the number, because I think it's important for people to understand what's at stake here. this is not a $5 million thing that we need to do to sell youth sports. I mean, $8.5 billion kind of gives us an idea of the scale or the importance of all of this. But I'm just amazed as to how does something like this start? I mean, how do you decide on that number? How do you take the first move? And maybe just talk us through the process of what's going to be required in order to get the approvals and to get this funding secured.
Sure. So first step in the process was for us to share our concerns with congressional leadership. We wanted to bring to their attention the fact that the youth sports community needed critical help and we weren't getting it. Youth sports is unique in that, the current social distancing has completely shut down our industry. We've seen programs canceled, nonprofits have to return program fees, large scale events like Special Olympics isn't having their games. So not only are they losing revenue for not having their games, but those critical sponsorship dollars that are tied into those kinds of events are lost. A lot of the event providers that make up our coalition aren't able to have their events, and then they're out the overhead in booking them in the first place. And so, while the PPP program and other relief within CARES, it has been so critical in supporting businesses, our coalition felt that it wasn't the right configuration of relief for programs like youth sports who are so reliant upon non-payroll employees to run our programs. So much of the youth sports overhead is going to operations, to contractors, to paying coaches, to volunteers. There's a lot of expense to that. And there's no revenue coming in. So what we did initially was put together our thoughts and request support from congressional leadership to provide a relief option for us. We sent a letter to Pelosi's office and Speaker Pelosi and Senator McConnell's office at mid-April. I'm losing track of the dates. Everything's happening so fast. And that was a letter from our coalition, which at the time, after 1 week of starting, we were only 400 strong. And then 2 weeks later, we'd grown to 2,000 strong, and we were able to get the support of the Congressional Caucus on Youth Sports. And they sent a letter around Congress, building support from other members of Congress to share their voice to our effort. And we were able to submit what's called the member sign-on letter, making the case for the need for congressional intervention to support these critical youth sports programs. That was, again, submitted to congressional leadership. This time that was done about a week ago. And there was over 28 members of Congress who supported that. It was a bipartisan effort. And now here we are this next week, moving into the next phase of our campaign with 3,000 organizations. And we have new legislation that was just introduced with Congressman Rose from New York, which we're so excited. It is a broadening of our agenda to also include relief specific for working families and the individuals who are directly impacted by this, in addition to working with the organizations. And we're continuing to get support in the Senate for our efforts as well. So there's a lot of irons in the fire, but collectively we have been very pleased with the support and understanding among elected officials that this is a critical industry that needs help.
So Benita, if I can come back to you now. So let's take a step back and just talk a little bit about the importance of sport in young people's lives. And it's a very broad area, spectrum, isn't it? Because at the one end, you've got these kind of pay-to-play programs, which privileged kids have access to thanks to the fact that their parents are able to pay for it, all the way through to kids from underserved or disadvantaged communities who are provided with access to sport through programs that are supported by laureates, for example. There's a wide spectrum here, but they're all important, aren't they? Why do you think, what's the insight into why sport matters so much for young people, and as a consequence, why it's important to society?
Yeah, I mean, I look at this as an athlete myself, formerly a youth athlete, obviously, and then an Olympic athlete, as a mom of 2 kids who both participate in sport, as a sports administrator, and of course, as a kind of sports-based youth development advocate. And my most recent role, I was CEO of Laureate Sport for Good Foundation, and we really funded organizations that use sport as a tool for social change. And that, to me, is the core of this coalition's efforts to ensure that those programs, serving kids who otherwise wouldn't have a chance to play, have it. But I also know that we use the term pay to play, and sometimes it can have a negative connotation. And I beg to differ with that. I think that, again, my heart and soul understands that we first have to take care of those who otherwise wouldn't have the opportunity. But I understand that many working families struggle to pull together the resources they need in order to apply that to their kids' sporting activities, and kind of rallying the family resources and supporting their children in these efforts and their kids' dreams and efforts. They're able to not only help these kids stay active, which, you know, more and more kids are becoming couch potatoes and sitting behind computer screens even more today because of COVID-19 and our social distancing. But we have to understand that physical activity helps to ward off many of the diseases, chronic diseases that kids are suffering from, be it, you know, obesity and diabetes, etc. So having healthier kids makes for healthy America. That's one thing. There's also the social and emotional benefits, as Terri mentioned earlier, that accrue to kids that participate in sport. I think of my daughter often and my son both, who through their social interactions with their teammates, through the encouragement and support they get from their coaches, they get something different than they get from mom and dad. And that sense of belonging, that sense of achievement, that sense of perseverance and hard work are lessons that in many cases can only be learned on the playing field. I played flute and piccolo. I was an engineering major in college. So I understand education is important and extracurricular activities, but something to say with the physical activity coupled with the youth development that happens on the playing field is really unique to sport.
And so, I mean, something that you and I have spoken about previously, or many times, Benita, is this idea that the value of sport is perhaps not appreciated by those in the corridors of power. And, you know, we've spoken about, wouldn't it be cool if there was some mechanism or measure that we could develop that could actually show, you know, what is the contribution of youth sports to a thriving, successful society? You know, we've seen things like the happiness, I think it's called the happiness index that came out of Bhutan, where they're actually now showing the link between happiness and the success of that nation. And it would be really cool if we could find a way to show the direct link between youth sports and the contribution that it makes and a thriving society here in the US.
Yeah, as a parent, it's interesting. My daughter is still in high school. She's a sophomore. Son is a sophomore in college. And, you know, when you have a kid at home that's really active, she's doing club volleyball and track at the same time. I'm pulling my hair out trying to get her from practice to practice and event to event. We're traveling every weekend. She's, you know, up late studying and then, you know, having a practice and do school the next day. We thought, you know, gosh, our life's so crazy. Can we just pause, you know, just for a second? So like for the first week, I think we were, or two, we were all just kind of relaxed and just like, whoa, we get to take a breath. But I tell you what, once it really sunk in that she was no longer able to participate for the next 2 or 3 months, and it was not only a blow to her, but it was a blow to our whole family. You know, there's social connections that you make. There's an energy about participating and supporting kids and youth sports that families feel and find joy and enjoyment in. And so that's stopping all over the country. And so I think there's a financial benefit to the world and to the United States through the businesses that are run in youth sport. But I think there's a happiness quotient, as you said, affiliated not only for the youth participants, but the coaches and families and organizations that support them. And so I think there's a huge void out there that people are feeling more. And I think to your point earlier, Neill, I think people are better appreciating the importance of youth sports in its absence.
Yeah. And it's always something about human nature that makes me sad. It takes a crisis to get people to recognize the value of things that they have before them. So, I mean, it's kind of crazy that we have to have a crisis before government funds youth sport again. But maybe this, you know, maybe this can be a stimulus to see something happen post-COVID in this space. Terri, coming back to you next. So $8.5 billion. I'm sure a lot of people are wondering, how's that money going to be spent? How's it going to be administered? What's the governance around it all going to be? So I'm sure that's something that you've been spending time thinking about.
We have, and we've actually come quite a long way in our thinking of this from where we initially started. Thanks in a lot of part to the work from the members of the Place Coalition, as well as the policymakers that I've been talking with every day. Our new vision of this relief is that we will be looking at it more like a forgivable loan program. So borrowing some of the ideas of the existing PPP structure, but focusing more on a formula that's more appropriate for our industry. So as I mentioned before, the major challenge that a lot of the youth sports providers are facing is that they're not payroll heavy. So when the calculation of relief through PPP is mostly focused on payroll or exclusively focused on payroll with a little padding for overhead, it's not getting our organizations where they need to be. So what we're recommending is a forgivable loan program for youth sports providers where the calculation of relief would be based on gross receipts in 2019 or operating loss, essentially defined by lost expenses due to COVID. And then the loan, you could use it for expenses that would include things like payroll, but it also could include your 1099 contractors, your facilities expenses, your workforce and volunteering, such as trainings and background checks, operational expenses for running your programs, overhead expenses for events or programs that were canceled due to COVID that aren't reimbursable through insurance or other means. And then there would be forgiveness built in, similar to how PPP is there's forgiveness built in there if you're using those funds for your payroll. But here, the forgiveness would be tied to the use for the eligible expenses that I just talked about. Then the other forgiveness would be tied to the number of participants in the program that are participating. The whole point behind PPP and some of these relief programs is we're trying to sustain the workforce. We're trying to sustain these programs. And so for youth sports, where we're coming from was a place of, it's not about paying these organizations. It's about ensuring these organizations can keep their doors open so the youth that come through them and get these critical benefits from sports can have those when it becomes safe. And even now, a lot of these organizations have pivoted and they're trying to do things through Zoom. Girls on the Run has a wonderful 5K program. That's the culmination of their season. I've been a volunteer coach and it's such a wonderful experience. And they pivoted and they did it online, and the girls could do their 5K run, walking in the neighborhood or riding an exercise bike. And so there's programs who are trying to do this now, and we want to encourage that to continue and give them resources to survive. So the other part of the loan program would be tied to ensuring that the participants come back, and that additional incentives could be built in for organizations to receive forgiveness who are serving underserved communities and at-risk kids. Mm-hmm. So that is the latest. That's the latest configuration of what we are seeking now in Washington. And
so, is there a component? Because I guess there are two ways you can approach this. The one is just to put a Band-Aid on, stemming the flow in the short term. Or you can actually use this as a lever to increase the capacity of the system to function more effectively after the initial crisis. Mm-hmm. Is your thinking extending as far as that?
Well, I know one of the things that there's a big priority for Plays is, as Benita said, sometimes it takes a crisis for people to realize how much things matter. Is, we want to not only ensure sports can survive, but, we want to make them better. And when I think we can use this opportunity to, as the community is coming together, as we're getting resources put into sports, to think about how can sports be better coming out of this crisis. And that's definitely a priority of us. So one of the things, for example, as an allowable expense is coach training, right? Background checks. We know that there is a need for increased safety procedures and improved training for the coaches who come through our youth sports programs. So, just right there, it's a small piece of the legislation, but it is something that could make a critical difference in improving sports programs for years to come.
Yeah.
And I also think that the interesting thing is that in making these programs accessible during the pandemic.
So Benita, it looks like we're having
making it more wider group.
Benita, we're having problems with your wireless there. You're breaking up, Chris.
Okay.
Let's try again. Let's try one more time.
Okay. Is this any better?
Yeah.
Right now? Okay. I was just saying that with programs being delivered virtually now during the pandemic, I'm hoping that that will continue as an augment to the in-person program. So I think more kids may have access to the programs virtually than they otherwise would have.
Right, that's a really good point. I mean, we're seeing that in one of our projects that we're running in Europe. It was supposed to be an in-person program. Now, because of COVID, it's become an online program, and all of a sudden, there's a whole new world has opened up that didn't exist before. So it's really, really exciting. And I think if we can have that as one of the byproducts of this initiative, that sport comes out stronger, comes out of it stronger than it went into it. I mean, that would be a real win. So I see our Zoom bomber Andrew has made an appearance, which means he's got some questions for us. I didn't introduce Andrew at the outset. Andrew is a colleague of mine at 17 Sports. And Andrew, welcome to Purposeful Stories in person, in face today anyway. So you've been monitoring the chat channels. You got some questions for us?
I do. So we have quite an international audience today, which is great. And a question that I've gotten a few times actually is around how the coalition is actually built. And if it's modeled off of something, are there any things that y'all are already looking at in terms of in other countries or other systems, or how to kind of, continue to build this? And as Neill was just talking about, not just stemming the flow now, but setting it up in the long term. And as part of that, are there any kind of key relationships or partnerships or even resources that you all rely on? So specifically mentioned in one of the questions was, a partnership for a healthier America, or Let's Move, or programs that are like this, that have that kind of amplification or the ability to kind of unite cross country.
Terri, why don't you take that?
Great. We have been really moving at rapid speed to just grow the coalition and bring as many organizations to the table as possible. Right now in the first phase of our work, we're so focused on the congressional relief because we have a short window of time to accomplish that goal. We're now starting to take a step back and look at structure and process and engagement, and making sure we have layers of our organization in place that we can really tap into the expertise of the network. And so we're just now in the process of kind of putting in place some additional leadership circles and structures so we can access the experience and networks and brains of everyone who's part of our organization. So there's no one specific model that we're looking at. I think a lot of us who are at the steering committee for the organization have experienced, in coalitions before. And so we're kind of pulling from a bunch of different things. We are partnering with a lot of different entities. The Let's Move campaign and the Partnership for Healthy America are really great national movements that were started under the Obama administration that had a lot of traction. And I think there's lessons from campaigns like that and others that we're looking to as we continue to grow and mobilize this group.
Mm-hmm. And I guess it's like a lot of things like this. It takes, somebody has to stand up first of all and say, hey, this is something we should be doing. And then when the second person stands up and says, hey, well, I'll join you, it's that second person that gets everybody else going, isn't it? And so, yeah, so if anybody that's listening out there, I guess take comfort from the fact that this coalition has come together in the US and that it can work. And you just need to do it. Just get out there and make it happen and start it and start building collaborations, because that's what it takes. There's a wonderful old saying.
I was checking to see if you could hear me now.
Yeah, we've got you. Thanks, Benita.
Good.
There's a wonderful old African proverb that says, if you want to go somewhere, I always get this wrong when I say it, but if you want to go far, go together. If you want to go quickly, go alone. And I think, things like this are really about building those coalitions where you can go far, much further together than you can individually.
And if I could, just interrupt for 1 second, please join us. This coalition is open to everyone. If you go to playsports.org, Wait, I think I said that wrong. playsportscoalition.org, excuse me. There's a button for individuals and for organizations to sign up, and we would welcome anyone listening to join us.
Yep. And there are also a couple of other things that have happened internationally. I know that there's is it the International Relief Fund, Sports Fund, that started internationally, which I think Loris is involved in, with Beyond Sport and some other people. Benita, are you familiar with that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So there are other things happening out there that are trying to do something similar.
I also, I think originally there were a lot of nonprofit organizations or people in organizations, brands and companies. I've talked to a couple this week even who look at that $8.5 billion number. And I was talking earlier about the pay-to-play versus grassroots nonprofit sports organizations where, the benefits of sports accrue to youth equally, no matter how they access it. But I think people were really concerned and wanting to make sure that the coalition was taking into consideration those that need the support the most. And so once we were able to assure people that that was indeed a priority, that's when really the floodgates opened and people of all sorts and organizations of all sorts have really joined the effort and there's a lot more that we can do together, as you said.
Andrew, another question.
Yeah, this is another one that there was multiple people asking, but it was about the role of the Olympic committees and joining in on this. Obviously, the really specifically, and this is a top of mind for me as a former Los Angeles resident, but obviously part of the LA's bid for 2028 now, I believe, was their investment in youth sports and then building up that infrastructure. And so a lot of people are wondering how, what role does the Olympics, the Olympic committees and the Olympic and the Paralympic organizations play in this?
We've been really fortunate. We have a lot of NGBs that have joined the Play Sports Coalition, and we are actively trying to get them all, and working through partnerships with those organizations to help grow the group as well. So I think we're trying to cast as wide and as big of a tent as possible, because the more voices coming to the table, the better. And the Olympic movement is so powerful in the investment they make in youth. And I think we share the same vision and the goal that we want to ensure that survives.
Yeah, I think people think of the Olympic movement as just, us Olympians and, the most elite athletes. And certainly we are represented by the Olympic and Paralympic Committee. But as Terri was saying, the national governing bodies are really the purveyors of sport throughout the country. And whether it's USA Track and Field or table tennis or rowing or gymnastics, each of them are given the responsibility by the Amateur Sports Act to oversee that sport throughout the country from grassroots on up. And so they are sanctioning clubs and events all over the country. And so it's really important to have their voice at the table, and we're happy to have many of them involved.
Mm-hmm. And so just to build on that, I think I'm right in saying that the IOC Executive Committee announced during the last couple of days that their response to COVID is going to be around just sticking to the values of the Olympic movement and Olympism in action, which really comes down to this principle of providing people with access to sport and believing that sport benefits people as individuals and helps them to become their best selves. So it's great to see that the Olympic movement and the other NGBs are involved. Just to build on that a little bit, what's the role of professional sport in all of this?
Funny you should ask. We are in the process of creating a strategic partnership group. When we've had this conversation, internally quite a bit, and there's a role, as I said, there's a role for everyone in this, right? But the challenge, especially when you're talking to Congress, is how big do you make this? How small do you make this, right? If you go too wide, are you creating a trouble with aligning support or diluting the funds? If you go too narrow, then are you not bringing enough people into the tent? And so, we decided as a coalition that the primary focus of who gets relief really has to go back to serving kids, because those are the people who are most in need and of the positive benefits that we've already talked about for sports. So the target is youth sports providers who are providing service for kids 18 and under. That does not mean that the leagues, with all of their assets and expertise and connections and voice, are not a critical and important role to helping raise up this issue. And we've been so pleased with their support. And many of them are joining our soon to be initiated strategic partnership group, which will hopefully kick off later this week. And we want to include those voices at the table. They've also been really essential. We have a working group that's in the process of developing some return to play protocols, or at least starting to think about that. And besides getting relief to these organizations, we have to start thinking about how do we safely get back to sport. Many states are starting to open up. And so we've been having conversations with experts, including some of those at the leagues who've already been thinking about this on their own end, to think about what policies and procedures do we need to put in place for youth sport organizations to safely get back to sport. And the league's advice and guidance in that process has been really critical for us to lean into.
Mm-hmm.
And the return to play considerations, as we're calling them, really also address issues related to parents and coaches as well, giving some guidance there. It's been great. I mean, when we started talking about return to play a few weeks ago, again, the whole thing's only been going for a few weeks, but soon thereafter, we're the only ones kind of thinking, not the only ones, but we didn't see other guidelines and considerations in place. And it seems each of these national governing bodies have started to stand up some new guidelines, as well as some of the leagues and the CDC, et cetera. So we found ourselves in instead of kind of creating these, but being an amalgamation of all of them and pulling from these areas of expertise to ensure that we had the best guidance possible.
So, this last half an hour, I feel probably it's like a year in the life of the coalition. Hey, this last half an hour, it's gone.
Yeah.
Thank you both for your time. It's been a fascinating conversation, and thank you for what you're doing. And please pass on our thanks to everybody that's involved. I guess what I'd like to end off with, unless Andrew, you have any more questions, is when you think, and Benita's going to laugh when I ask this question because I always ask it, but when you think forward 10 years. What does youth sports in the USA look like as a consequence of this intervention? What's your dream? What do you wish for?
My dream is, equitable access to sport for all youth. That is the dream. It has been the dream. We don't have a Ministry of Sport in the United States. And if this coalition can really move the needle with Congress to create such an entity or empower an existing entity like the USOPC with having better oversight to ensure that kids all over the country have equal and equitable access. The second would be something we talked about a little bit earlier, and that is a higher level appreciation for the role and power and impact of youth sport in American society and the value. And I particularly think about it as it relates to K through 12 education, where we've had less and less access to physical activity and sport. Fewer and fewer varsity sports, less and less PE. And I know, even as my daughter was little, or my son, they start to get frustrated with their homework or something. We just say, hey, we could go outside with them and make them run around the house 2 or 3 times and burn off some energy, and they'd come back and somehow their brains would open back up. So physical activity, we know there are all kinds of data that show that those kids involved in physical activity, but particularly in sports, do better in school. So their education outcomes related to that, but all the other benefits that we talked about accrue to help these kids do better in life as well. And I want to see that valued more, particularly in K through 12 education.
And Terri?
For me, I would love to see a greater appreciation for the fun of sport. I was, as I mentioned, I was a competitive basketball player. I also coached youth sports for years. And I think, as Benita mentioned, this crisis has really just been a loss to families and individuals. And I think sometimes, especially our kids at such a young age, are so caught up in the rat race that is elite sport. Or sport that becomes elite incidentally, and it's about the game and the win and the next one and the running from here to there. And I know when I was a kid, I just forgot to stop and smell the roses and have fun and enjoy my teammates. And hopefully what we can come out of this is just a greater sense of the fun of sports and the connection sports brings to, you know, your friends and your coaches. And it's not about the wins and the losses, but it's about everything else. And maybe by not having it, those intangibles that I think often aren't the focus as they should be, come back to us. And that's what I'd like to see when my daughter, she's 2, she's a little too young to play sports, though she dunks her little basketball right now. When she's playing, you know, it's for the fun of it. And it's not for trying to get a scholarship or trying to win the game, although if we do, cool. But that's what I'd love to see coming out of this.
Right. And I think just to add to the conversation, what I'd love to see is just youth sport being taken more seriously by the powers that be, the people with influence and with budgets to invest in important things. And I hope that we can also use, and I would have wished we talked about this, we can also use this opportunity to make sure that girls have equal access to sport, just like boys do. You know, it'd be interesting to see if you could use your funding to influence that a little bit, Terri.
Yes, Benita and I both come from a background at the Women's Sports Foundation. That's where our first home, my first home was. And so Title IX and ensuring there's equal access to women and girls has been a lifelong passion and work for me. And so when we talk about giving priority to underserved communities, girls, kids with disabilities, minorities, I mean, those are areas that our coalition cares about, and the 2 of us personally are very passionate and committed to ensuring it happens. So thank you for mentioning that very important point.
Great. Well, that's a great place to end. Thank you both for your time today. Keep going, and I'm sure all of us on the call today would love to help in any way we can. So just, Terri, just remind people once again, if they want to join the coalition, where do they go and do that?
Yes, to join the coalition, you can go to playsportscoalition.org, and I'd be remiss if I also didn't encourage you to raise your voice and take action by contacting your member of Congress. We have legislation that we worked on with Congressman Rose that was introduced yesterday, and we're trying to get as many sponsors as possible for this investment act in working families and youth sports organizations. So if you go to our website, you can take action and send a message to your member of Congress to encourage them to support youth sports. Excellent.
And for those of you that want to continue the conversation, we have our Sport 2.0 Slack channel that's slowly building up quite a following. After the webinar today, we'll send you an email with this confirmation of the link so that you can join that Slack channel, and we'll also include details of the things that Terri spoke about, where you can join, pledge your support to the coalition, and also just keep abreast with what's happening when our next webinar will be. So our next webinar will be in 2 weeks' time. Stay tuned for information on that. It's going to be one in French from our French office with our guest, a senior person from Decathlon, talking about how they are engaging in COVID through their lens. So that should be really interesting to get a brand's perspective on all of this. Thank you for tuning in. And until next time, Benita and Terri, thank you so much. Stay safe, stay well, and keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you for having us.
Bye. Thank you.